Welcome to Sex Ed with DB. I'm your host, DB. Let's get into it. Welcome back to the podcast. If you love and support the work that we do, consider joining my crew on Patreon to win amazing prizes like our adorable merch, exclusive behind-the-scenes content, and incredible sex toys. Go to patreon.com/sexedwithdb to join my crew. Get discounts at all of your favorite sex toy shops at sexedwithdb.com. And follow us on Insta at sexedwithdb podcast and on TikTok at sexedwithdb. If you want to partner with us, email us at sexedwithdb@gmail.com. To all my friends out there in a long-distance relationship, are you feeling disconnected from your boo? Wish they could bring you pleasure in person if FaceTime sex just isn't cutting it? Well, thank goodness for Clonea Willy. Clonea Willy makes DIY molding kits that allow anyone to make an exact replica of any penis or vulva into a high-quality, 100% body-safe sex toy, so you can stay connected no matter where you are. Use promo code SEXEDWITHDB20 for 20% off at cloneawilly.com. If you're like me, it's important to choose a toy with body-safe materials and a proven orgasmic track record. Fun Factory pioneered body-safe toys and has a serious cult following of vibrator enthusiasts. Honestly, you can't beat their medical-grade silicone toys. Not only are they long-lasting, they're also designed by German engineers for serious motor power. Ready for an ubergasm? Use discount code SEXEDWITHDB for 15% off your new favorite Fun Factory toy. Here are my top 3 favorite things I love about Lube. Number 1, Lube makes sex feel a lot more pleasurable. It's as simple yet as powerful as that. Number 2, Lube is recommended by leading doctors, and its body-friendly ingredient list makes it widely used by people with sensitivities to lubricants. And number 3, Lube will not stain clothing or bedding. Any spills can be easily cleaned with detergent and water. Get your bottle of Lube now with code SEXEDWITHDB for 15% off at uberlube.com. Good afternoon, Alex. Welcome to the podcast. How's it going?
Good. Thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to this all week.
Oh, that's so sweet.
Yeah.
I've also been looking forward to it since I watched your film a couple days ago and was very, very excited. It is super fun and we're going to get all into it.
Right.
But let's get us started. Why don't you tell us who you are and just a little bit about your background?
Yeah. So I am a science and health reporter by trade. And for many reasons, I've kind of been drawn to stories about sex education. And yes, this has been so we started in 2014, finished in 2021, kind of 7-year journey of me putting together a sex education documentary of me trying to finally get a good comprehensive sex education at 36 years old, no matter how awkward or torturous that may be.
Yeah. Awkward, torturous, exciting, weird,
yes,
fascinating, so many things. So you're a science reporter, and tell me a little bit more about like where you've worked and what you've reported on.
Yeah, so I've had a few lifetime careers. In my lifetime, it's been I started out as a molecular toxicologist, doing work in biotech, doing cancer drugs. But I found I enjoyed doing the presentations about the work much more than I actually enjoyed doing the work. And I think I've always been drawn to science and health because that's like the only arena in the 90s and 2000s that gave me any sense of security that who I was as a person, as a queer man, was totally normal. It was totally within the normal range of human diversity. And so understanding how to, analyze data, understand the world, and realizing very early on that a lot of the good sex research, sex education has been out there for decades. It just doesn't get into schools. And thinking like, okay, well, rather than, scream into the abyss, what do I do about it? And science reporting kind of became that outlet. So I was doing a lot of reporting, mostly around the Obamacare stuff. I was doing a lot of health reporting and net policy reporting. And I was pitching tons of stories about, I want to do more about sex education, why this is important, contraception, all this stuff. And a lot of the stories I was pitching, for good reason, I think, in retrospect, were not being taken by my editors because they were telling me, this is something, what you're doing is interesting. It's more educational. We need a story. We need something viewers can hook onto. We need a little more meat and kind of as a middle finger to them in many ways. I decided to I'll do it myself. I'll raise the money. I'll get these interviews and do these do a documentary. And then, lo and behold, 18 months later, I'm editing. I'm like, oh, this doesn't fit together. There's no story. I need
a little more.
I need something more. And so that was the process I started to go into around, do I act? How, first of all, is it even possible for me to be an objective observer in a documentary? My training is to be that objective, fly on the wall observer to help people process information. But ultimately, what I wanted to do is it harkens back to that deep kind of anger and shame I've felt for my entire life. And so I think the only way I understood how to unlock the story and get people to go on a journey where maybe they confront some shames that they've never confronted before was to be open and personal about mine. But that was also a big reason why it took so long to make.
Yeah, totally. Also, your work on like Obamacare or like policy, like also very much is like a part of this whole conversation around sex ed and sexual health and healthcare, right? So that certainly belongs, I should say. I think it's like all encompassing. So I'm very appreciative of that work that you did as well.
Thanks. Yeah.
And I'd love you spoke a little bit about, sex ed in schools. And as you probably know, that's a big topic of conversation here at Sex Ed with DB.
Yes.
We talk a lot. We use a lot of those Guttmacher stats that you put in your documentary. And so I'm curious, like, what, you mentioned that you mostly grew up in the Bay. Curious what your sex ed was like. Like, did you receive any info that was maybe culturally relevant or like took into consideration your queer or Asian American identities? Like, what was that like for you?
So the short answer is no, I did not get that education.
Got it.
And I think, in the 90s and 2000s, the kind of mandate around what is called sex education, but it's really not sex education. It's like pregnancy and disease avoidance education.
Yes. Or abstinence.
Right, exactly. It was to prevent teen pregnancy and prevent HIV/AIDS. And HIV/AIDS was like the big fear at the time. So that's like my first introduction. I didn't understand how man on man sex could would lead to higher HIV contraction. I just knew that it was somehow like this horrible, risky behavior that would definitely lead to HIV, right? So that was the only introduction I had to kind of non-heterosexual sex, and so yeah, and of course, like, no discussion of race, no discussion of even really gender, other than like women had to be more careful, or kind of these horrible kind of retrograde ideas. But yeah, I'm glad California's changed a lot, but when I was going through school, it definitely was pretty rough. Yeah.
Yeah. And as you mentioned just now, California has changed. There's, the California, I think it's called like the Healthy Youth Act or something like that, where California is definitely one of the states who is mandating comprehensive sex education. It is changing. And at the same time, it's not for many other states. We know that like over $2 billion thus far has gone to abstinence only until marriage education, federally funded, by the way, from the government. And that's terrible. There's so much science and data that show that abstinence only education does not work. And in addition to that, is actively harmful. Right. So with that, let's get into your film, A Sexplanation. As I mentioned, I watched it, thought it was really wonderful. I thought there were a lot of really fun and unique pieces and themes that, I hadn't really even thought of before or seen as a sex educator.
That's great to hear.
Yeah. And, I've been doing this work for over 5 years in this field. And so can you, for the listeners who haven't heard of it, give me like, a little one-liner, like what is this film about? And why you decided to go on this journey. You kind of mentioned a little bit about your upbringing, but I'm curious if there was like an aha moment or something specific that made you want to go on this journey.
Totally. Yeah. So I think that the log line is basically, I'm trying to get a comprehensive sex education for the first time in my life in my 30s. So I traveled the US and Canada, talking to philosophers, educators, politicians, priests, even my own parents, to try to understand, my deepest, darkest shames, fears, and desires, and how do we express that in a healthy way. And I think, when why I decided to do this, I think for so much of my, since puberty to maybe 30, I was the best way I can describe my life is just angry. I was so angry at what I had to go through unnecessarily, what my family had to go through, how ill prepared we were to really process what should be one of the most beautiful, life-affirming things of being a human. And for a long time, I projected that anger outwards in terms of being politically active, in terms of my reporting, in terms of really how I treated other family members, other people I disagreed with. By the time I got into my 30s, and after some amazing cognitive behavioral therapists, basically I realized that anger was really a cover for some deep, deep shames I still felt about who I was and about my body and how I live, my sexuality, how I express myself. And so I think the movie ended up being like actually delving deep, as deep as possible, my own personal subjective story of all the shames I have and how do you actually let that go? How do you actually do that? Because it's so difficult. And I wanted it to be a way to showcase, like, it's a long journey. It's very difficult, awkward, torturous in many ways emotionally. But if you can work at it every day, it's an everyday thing, I think. The payoffs are just beyond imagined. So that's kind of through this process what I learned.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
I think that takes guts to say, like, hey, this was kind of my way in which I'm like processing my shame and my grief about my life. And I really relate with you when it comes to kind of like confronting your parents on those things and like doing it in a kind and gentle way, but kind of like holding parents accountable for like their missteps with parenting, because I'm not a parent yet. I hope to have kids at some point in my life within the next couple years, but I can only imagine what parents went through and go through in order to have those challenging conversations with their kids. And like, it is their responsibility to like fix themselves and like learn how to approach that with their kids. So totally. I think, tell me a little bit more about like those conversations with your parents and if you felt like you got out of them like what you were seeking.
I think for the most part, a parent-child relationship will always be incredibly complicated, full of always having to reassert boundaries and kind of communication. And so I think the one thing, when it comes to my parents, I think if you were to ask me 10 years ago, there would have been so much blame and anger still there about why they didn't do the thing. The very, in many ways, in my mind, I'm thinking at the time, simple things that they could have done to just release a lot of shame and suffering. But I have to give my parents a lot of credit. When I came out of the closet at 17, my dad's reaction was, what I remember is that he was very open in the fact that he found the idea of two men being intimate kind of viscerally disgusting, but that I should never let that interfere with my own personal happiness, that he would do everything he could to try to work through that he would find to his credit, he did do the work. He put me into therapy. He found local gay people. He sat with them and heard their stories, and he went to gay prides with me. He fell asleep through numerous indie gay movies. He did all the work that I think I just feel so fortunate for. It took us 20 years, to get to this point of where we could have this conversation in the film. And in a way, we almost needed like the veneer of the film of like it being around work to have the conversation. Like we couldn't have that conversation.
I'm getting paid for this, guy.
Exactly. It couldn't be a direct conversation. We needed that filter in many ways still. But I think, to their testament, my mom has now been in more gay pride parades than I have. They've been
fantastic.
Yeah, they've really shown up for me in ways, and I don't want it to paint this as like, all puppies and rainbows. There was shouting my matches, screaming, crying, silence for months. It was a very difficult process.
Ebbs and flows,
yes,
for sure,
for us to get there. But when it counted and when it mattered, we showed up for each other and worked through a lot of this. So I think by the time I was making this documentary, and I was like, I want to film conversations between us. We had done that work where my dad now understood, like, even if he didn't fully understand, he understood that, like, my happiness, he could just see, my happiness was dependent on me understanding this and processing this and maybe helping other people through this. And so that's been just such a joy to and it took, lots of therapy, 7 years of talking to experts for us to have that final conversation in the film where I ask all my questions and reveal all the shames that I've been scared to talk about. And so I've just been overjoyed that they were willing to meet me at that moment and be present there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And also just like very hard to hear from an outside perspective, like the idea that, yes, like we're giving your dad a lot of credit and where credit is due. And like for him to say out loud, like, I genuinely find this disgusting is very damaging. Like just to even hear that. And I do not identify as gay.
Oh, yeah.
And I think like at least I'll speak for myself in like my Brooklyn bubble and in my like liberal bubble, you forget that like most other parts of the country and the world are very much indoctrinated into this idea that like this is America is the most religious country in the world, like very in terms of like Christian and Christianity and the way in which that we go through our thoughts and feelings around religion and how we act on them. And there's just so much to be unpacked there. And like starting with our parents is like a really powerful place to start.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll just like share a little bit about my dad really quickly. My dad was born and raised in Afghanistan and we're Afghani Jews. And he moved to Israel when he was like a teenager and then to America when he was in his late 20s.
Wow.
And so he definitely like didn't understand how to like have talks with me about my period. And like that was not something that him and his like mom, who had 8 children in Afghanistan, were like actively talking about. It was like not normalized, similar to here in America. And so I've had him on my podcast. My mom is an OBGYN and I've had her on every season. And her and I have had some serious conversations around the way in which that I felt supported and shamed by her. And just that she's like my number one role model in this field. And I still have some things to say about the way in which I felt as a child.
It's so complicated. Yeah.
And so I really related to those parts of the film. So thank you for like making that so public and like so normalized. I think that was really fantastic.
Oh, thank you. And I could say the same for you. I mean, to have these conversations in public, especially with immigrant parents too, I think it's something I love to see and want to see more of.
Yeah, for sure. You kind of mentioned this, but you really had conversations with like a wide range of people, right? It was like psychologists, researchers, priests, Pornhub data scientists, like so many different people here. You like had an MRI done of like you jerking off in an MRI machine to see what would happen to your brain.
Yeah.
Like, I was like, oh shit, he's really jerking off in that MRI machine. Holy fuck, that's awesome. But like, tell me about what was maybe surprising for you, or like what in the moment you like really remember throughout. Obviously 7 years is a very long time to be making something. So I'm sure there were lots of learnings and phases of kind of like understandings about yourself and about like the world of sexuality and sexual health. But give me a couple of your insights here.
Yeah. So I think honestly, the interview in the film where I think of my life before the interview and my life after, there's 2, but the one that really sticks out, the one that was great was with Kristen Gilbert. She's a nurse in Vancouver who's like this amazing sex educator. She gives an amazing definition of sex and sexuality. I mean, the room was like in tears after that interview. Her definition has just changed how I see things. But the one that really maybe stuck me on a more emotionally personal level was my interview with Father Danielle Godfrey. He's a Catholic priest. And, my family we were raised Catholic, and I just have to believe, I just don't see on the way that the damage the Catholic Church has done to so many families when it comes to matters of sexuality is just unforgivable in many ways, And so I avoided it for a long time, but I knew that had to be a part of the story. If I was going to tell my own story, I had to talk to someone in the church. And for good, and a lot of people, and then the conversation I had with him in which he not only admits how damaging the church has been to women, sexual minorities, but describes how he wishes the church would be upfront and meeting people around what sex actually provides. It actually provides just like intimate, pleasurable connections, the connections and relationships that define our lives, the relationships we'll remember on our deathbed, the relationships that make life worth living. There is an actual, if you peel back the institutional layers and you peel back the politics and you peel back the power and control, there is actually a message when it comes to Christianity around loving people. That is valid, and there's a spirituality to sex that I had so long ignored. I think because I was so angry at the Catholic Church, I shut off any conversations around that in my own mind. So talking with that was just, his definition is just so beautiful in terms of how he sees sex as a wide continuum, much more encompassing than intercourse or genital connection or even physical connection. That is something that is something that I think, if only every Catholic priest was like him, I think the world would be just such a more better, beautiful, peaceful place.
Yeah, I was also really struck by that conversation in the film and like using my own biases to kind of like let down my guard a little bit. I think as a Jew who like just isn't really exposed to these messages in my faith, although there are plenty of other harmful messages in like the Orthodox Jewish community. That was kind of my like moment of coming to this field. Was I was in Israel for a year teaching English, and my teaching cohort went to like a really religious community, and the super Orthodox rabbi was like basically just sharing super sexist traditions in his community. And I was like, fuck that. That's really harmful. And you're just like acting like that's totally normal. So like, all that is to say, these harmful ideas and messages around sexuality exist across religions.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that like conversation though with that priest like allowed me to kind of like let down my guard a little and be like, oh wow, like I think it's important for people to give leaders in faith a chance if they are people who are promoting LGBTQ acceptance or like having a more open view on sexuality. I think also there was like a queer pastor on an episode of Queer Eye that I was like, oh, that's cool. We should also consider like queer people who are leaders in their faith in their communities. Yeah. Can I bring up that conversation that you had with that politician right quick about porn?
Yeah.
Okay, can you describe it first for people listening?
So a state senator, Todd Weiler of Utah,
Republican.
Republican. He is the first legislator to get an basically declare porn as a public health crisis in any state in the U.S. Because I think the porn is actually the biggest section we devote to the movie, because I think that's one of the things, at least in my personal experience, that's the only thing I could turn to see the depictions I wanted to see of men having sex with men. How does this actually work? And to me, that kind of the way he was describing it, I think just compounds the shame people have that like even this thing that maybe is their only outlet to understand this sex, especially when there's only abstinence, only education, no one's talking about it in their community, especially in Utah. That they're now just like cutting off the last thing that maybe can give them some sort of release in many ways. So I spoke to him about why I thought his stance was harmful. That I understood maybe on a certain level that we had the same goal, which is like making sure kids get the right information, and porn is problematic in many ways. I wouldn't say porn is problematic inherently, just the way it's produced, and kind of like the way Hollywood is problematic, porn is problematic in the same ways. But movies aren't inherently bad, right? So we kind of had a dialogue around, why I thought that was bad. And I will say, if I had had that interview even a year earlier, it would have been a completely bad faith. Like I would have gone there with the intent to destroy him. I would have gone there with the intent to let him know how he's just probably perpetuating shames that have destroyed, millions of people's lives before, and now he's continuing it. But I think through this process, I've really learned that politically, I'm not talking morally or spiritually or ethically, politically, if the only way we can ever come to any kind of, if what I want is to be heard and listened to and loved non-judgmentally, even if you disagree with me, it is hypocritical of me to go into interaction and not, at least initially, providing the same thing, right? I think if we want to have dialogue, rather than, contentious debate, you kind of have to approach that interview in that way and try as much as possible to find the humanity, which is so difficult. It's so difficult.
Sometimes is.
Yeah. And so that was a conversation where I came out thinking, if he was my neighbor, I bet he would be an amazing neighbor. I bet he'd be a great person to live next to, even though our beliefs are, I'm very, very, as a human being, not necessarily the politics or policies, I would never vote for him, but I think that is a conversation I'm still kind of grappling with and processing in many ways in terms of how do I treat other people, and do I treat them the way that I wish they treated me?
Are you falling into a pattern with your partner? Looking to spice things up but aren't sure how? Exit the ordinary with Lion's Den. Lion's Den has hundreds of your favorite brands to help you and your partner reconnect or try something new. From novices to dungeon masters, there are products for every comfort level. With 50 plus years in business, Lion's Den is here to help. Can't make it to a local store? Shop online and chat with a customer service team member while you shop. Lion's Den offers our listeners 15% off in-store and online using code SEXED with DB. Excitement, intimacy, anticipation, contentment. Uberlube lets you feel all the things you want to feel when it comes to sex with yourself and with a partner. It makes sex better for everyone by reducing friction and increasing pleasure. Recommended by leading doctors, Uberlube is body-friendly, free of parabens, preservatives, and petrochemicals. Plus, Uberlube is latex compatible, so it's safe, effective, and pleasurable to use with condoms. Try Uberlube now with code SEXED with DB for 15% off at uberlube.com. What does self-love mean to you? To me, self-love is recognizing my needs and desires and making time to experience pleasure. That's what Satisfiers is all about. Satisfiers is committed to helping everyone unlock their full sexual potential, eliminating shame and demonstrating all the health benefits associated with sexual pleasure. The Satisfier Connect app pairs with their amazing toys so you can discover your personal pleasure preferences in real time. Use code SEXEDWithDB for 30% off at us.satisfier.com. Yeah, really good points. One, I think that's a skill to be able to approach someone who you fundamentally disagree with and
it's a lot of work. It's a lot of exhausting.
Emotional labor.
Yeah, very
with,
exhausting.
Open arms and an open mind. So I commend you for that. And I don't think that you were being pushy in any way as a viewer who probably shares your politics. So that's cool. And as you mentioned, right, I want to get into the context of this conversation. He declared porn as a public health crisis.
Mm-hmm.
He was basically saying that, he does not watch porn. Porn is unrealistic. He then goes on to say that he, quote, loves seeing his wife's naked body, unquote. I was like, okay, kind of a weird thing to add. But essentially his whole thing was that, porn is harmful. Kids get access to porn, and the issue then is the porn and not necessarily sharing with students the difference between porn and real life sex.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is something that I really want our listeners who are listening now to grapple with is this is not only a Republican fear. This also exists in liberal spaces.
Oh,
this
yeah.
Fear from parents of their kids getting access to porn and shutting down the entire conversation, regardless of if you're going to give a kid porn literacy, hence to be able to differentiate. I do one-off kind of health weeks and teach sex ed in middle school and high school. And I was just teaching sex ed in a private Brooklyn liberal middle school.
Okay.
And we sent a survey out to the parents being hey, what do you want to talk to us about? And what are you curious about? And what are your concerns? And most of the parents were this is fantastic. Thank you so much for doing this. So I don't want to, de-highlight the importance of the supportive parents.
Mm-hmm.
And yet there were a minority of a couple parents who were very loud and wrote paragraphs about, if you talk about porn, I'm pulling my kid out. There's porn is human trafficking, like a lot of misinformation around porn, the people who do it, the consent around porn, the fact that there is ethical porn. Like there's a lot of issue that I take as a sex educator with parents who know absolutely, and people who know absolutely nothing about the subject and feel like because of their own internalized shame and fucked up notions that they have with porn and the fact that they like fetishes and they like porn, they push that shit on other people and it drives me bananas.
Oh, yeah.
And I can't handle senators and politicians and people who don't know what the fuck they're talking about. Like, don't you, it just, how do you feel the way I feel? And if you do, how do you handle yourself when you talk to people like that?
I don't know if I handle myself the best, but I would say, I think this is worth having a long discussion about, because I think at our core, we have to be clear. Like, we as a species have been drawing like exaggerated versions of fucking, on cave walls since our
the beginning of
time. Beginning, right? This is
our time.
This is who we are as a species. We enjoy, extreme, taboo, controversial depictions of sex. It is pleasurable and enjoyable, and inherently that is nothing to be ashamed of. That is just who we are. You enjoy, murder shows. You enjoy, like superhero movies. You enjoy race. All these extreme, taboo, kind of like violent things. This is just, for a long time, I did separate porn, like somehow it wasn't part of like the media landscape, but it's a very big part of our media. I mean, it's the media I consume probably every day. Yeah. And to think of it like differently is kind of weird, and I think there are very valid points around how porn is produced, the business practices behind porn, how performers are treated, the ethnic body diversity, the how gender is portrayed, how sex just should look, but the answer just has to be just like, if a romantic comedy from the 1960s is just almost, it's like you can't watch it because of the messages it shows about how love should be, or race should look, or all these things. Porn needs to go through that same reckoning, sure, but let's have the conversation there. Let's not teach people that this thing that you can't help but enjoy and love and provides meaning and pleasure and, beauty in your life is somehow wrong. And I think, if protecting kids is the goal, I was in a family that was anti-porn and I still found it, So the answer...
Kids are finding it. That's the thing. That's
the thing. Yeah, you can't shield your kid from porn for the rest of their life. And if they get into adulthood having very negative, shameful feelings about it, it'll just come out in even worse possible ways. It's hard, again, to get past, I think, what is, to my mind, some sort of unprocessed trauma for a lot of these parents. It's just triggering and they can't see a reason. And I get that.
Right.
But to be clear for the people who maybe just, it shocks them because it seems so, new and scary. But there are, I think, enough people that if you explain it to them in those ways, they get it. And as long as you're very clear that the point is not to like show kids porn or teach kids porn, which is how it's often framed, and it's just easy to fearmonger because of the ignorance in our culture. That it really is to help parents have these conversations that are so difficult, and to help parents like get their kids to understand, like, just like you don't see people flying in the street, or like if someone were to be a vigilante like Batman, they would be quickly killed probably. Porn is the same thing. What you see there is athlete level editing and
they're professional.
Yeah, professional. It's not a realistic portrayal, and kids are so easy to quickly, just that simple framing, I think, would just go a huge way to help people, especially kids who are so scared and terrified and making the sex thing go well. Porn is just not a way I should think about this at all. But because no one's talking about it, that's the only thing they have to hold on to.
And let's talk about the stats really quickly when it comes to at what age young people are exposed to porn. This is according to Bloom Science, a really awesome organization that does age-appropriate sex ed for kids. And what we do know is that more than 1 in 4 of our kids has already seen hardcore porn online by the age of 11. And that number goes up to 2 in 3 kids by the age of 15. That's a majority of kids that will have been exposed to some kind of hardcore porn by the age of 15. 15, you're usually like in 9th grade or something, like maybe 10th grade. Like this, senator in the documentary was like, well, when they're 18, they can go nuts. They can watch as much porn as they want. It's like, that's actually not the right way to do that. Like, you want to let kids know the information, the facts, age appropriately. That doesn't mean you're showing it to them. That just means that you're sharing with them what they might see and hear and feel, and give them space and time to reflect on that. I just think that's such a critical piece here. And you covered it a lot, as you mentioned in the documentary. So I wanted to make sure we got to it.
Oh, yeah. And I think that you were going to bring up an amazing point that like, that the kind of what often is framed as like the moderate center-right position is like, at 18, kids can go nuts.
Yeah.
But if your whole life from birth to 18 has been like, no, negative, stop, abstinence only, and then how can you expect kids to flip a switch to then be like all of a sudden like sexually free? And of course not. They're going to be damaged from all that, and entering those relationships with really just ignorance is just so much more harmful in the long run.
Absolutely. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about what I maybe thought was kind of missing in the documentary. And I'm sure, as a reporter, that you can't get every angle covered in one documentary, but I do think it's important to kind of note, I really appreciated your approach to comprehensive sex ed, porn literacy, queer experiences, right? Like, I think all of these things were covered super well. Shame, really approaching and figuring out like what feels good for people in their bodies, masturbation. But I did feel like there were some important highlights of sexual health and sexuality missing. And like a couple of those might be the asexuality spectrum, maybe how body image plays into sex, BIPOC expert perspectives, and sex and disability. Those were like some things that were coming up for me while watching this movie. And I'm curious how you feel about these really critical perspectives, and if you have any thoughts on those things now. It's a long list, so feel free to pick what you want.
Yeah, totally. And I think, I say over and over again, this is as a first-time feature documentary filmmaker, it's been like an amazing education on how not to make a documentary. You make every mistake possible. And I think the other thing is with a topic as broad as sex, or maybe like 20% of the interviews we did made it into the film. You have to make some brutal compromises and cuts to keep an audience engaged, to hit a time limit that you want. For example, the one of the most brutal cuts that we made, we spent the day at the Lion Martin Healthcare Center, which is it's a free clinic in San Francisco, but it only serves trans people, and the healthcare professionals are also all trans. So it's like this beautiful place where you can, it's such a rare thing to have in the world, and so we spent a day with them, talked to a lot of the healthcare providers there, and it became very clear very quickly as we started editing, gosh, people are so far behind in their understanding of sex and sexuality. To do this topic justice, to get people to really to the emotional place where they empathize with what's going on. Each one of our interviews is 3 minutes in the film, so you just can't do that topic justice. We say like, gosh, we wish, if we ever get the privilege to make another movie, Queer Kink will have to be the sequel, because we talked to so many queer researchers, kink researchers, asexuality researchers. Morag Yule, who is in the movie for maybe 3 seconds. She's an asexuality researcher out of Toronto who's doing it totally, I think I thought of asexuality at the time as like, it's almost like, like a dim light in which there are like, have a shade of the full expression of sexuality, that they're somehow repressed, or but no, that's like such an ignorant perspective to come at, that sexuality is so much more than just, you might not want to have intercourse, but that doesn't mean you don't have like a full range of human connections and relationships that you want to have. That really changed my mind, or changed my perspective on so many things talking to her. and especially as like a queer Asian man, like I wish we could have talked so much more about race and body, because like, you know, I mean, I fully, you know, I've rarely seen myself represented on the screen like I would like to, and definitely not as a full 3-dimensional sexual being. And the issues I have with myself around how Asian men are presented in Western media, you know, was a whole direction we took things, but again, that takes, you know, I'm not, for better or worse, the decisions we made, you know, to tell kind of the simplest, cleanest story about one aspect of my sexual journey, specifically around with my parents, right? I mean, we do. I mean, I feel, you know, we do have some BIPOC people in the film. Lori Petito, she's an Arab woman. Sofia Garza, Latina woman. But yeah, I mean, some of the people I wish we could have included. I mean, all I'll say is, like, in the future, I think spending the time to really think through these issues maybe more thoroughly is something that one lesson I really have learned. Yeah.
Yeah, and this isn't really, you know, not to like challenge you or to, you know,
no,
say, you did this bad or whatever.
No, I think it's important. I you know, it's a really, you know,
it's tricky.
It's tricky. It's so difficult, and I, you know, I just hope I get to do more of this to show that, you know, there's so many more aspects. You know,
yeah, totally. And I really appreciate this idea of like, oh, you know, like maybe in the next one, or like maybe there's other opportunities to cover those things. Maybe it's like an Instagram live with like an asexual, you know, educator. Maybe it's, you know, there are different ways I feel in order to engage with these kinds of things. I think me in my position of like hosting this podcast, I think a lot about like, okay, well, by choosing X, who am I going to upset, you know, or who am I missing? What what ideas or what perspectives am I like really not considering in my own like cis white presenting mixed race like presentation and in my experience. And I just think that we as a collective are getting better in like really taking deep consideration into like what exactly is missing here and how we can approach that.
Yeah. One thing I do, I am very, I'll say proud of, you know, I think, you know, one of the tropes that, especially around specifically Asian immigrant families, I think you get this idea of, and I'm not saying there is some truth to it, but this idea of like stern tiger parents that do not care at all about the humanity of their children. And I wanted to show people like, no, of course that's not true, that's a complicated, you know, complex 3-dimensional relationship, and putting that out there, I think I didn't realize quite how meaningful it would be, but you know, sharing my parents with the world has been just such an added benefit to this whole process.
Totally. Yeah. And again, took guts. So like, I really commend you for that.
Thank you.
We have a couple questions left. This has been so fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for these amazing questions. And it's always great to talk about this. So I just appreciate it so much.
Of course. What's like, this is a tough one. One like key takeaway that you hope our listeners today will, you know, really bring with them about sex education or about like the journey that you went through for a Sexplanation?
Yeah, this is something I've thought about a lot. I think, you know, I think if at the beginning of this film, I would have identified as 100% sex positive. I would have leaned into that identity of being sex positive. But I think through this process, I've really learned that a more helpful framing is being sex neutral. That sex positivity, especially when it's around cheerleading, you know, I think I would have, if I would have come across a gay man who says like, I don't enjoy anal sex, I would have been like, that's because you're repressed and haven't dealt with the trauma of being in a sex negative culture. Like of course you love to bottom. Like, of course, you know,
go to therapy.
Yeah. Like you're missing out. But I realize now that I am my own, that kind of, it's its own sense of shame. I am shaming someone and doing the exact thing that I think that I'm preventing, right? And I think through this process has really taught me that the skill I need to develop the most is how to listen non-judgmentally and to accept people exactly where they are, even if it is true that they're sexually repressed and that they're, you know, haven't thought through critically all the facets of their sexuality. that's okay. That's fine. That's just where they are. And if there's any hope that they would come to a place where they feel comfortable asking questions, questioning their sexuality, questioning what it means to be a sexually healthy person, the only hope we have is if we provide those spaces where they can feel safe enough to inch their way forward and ask those questions. Because I've learned now, it takes so much fear. There's so much fear and shame in being open, even a little bit about something. Like the idea that like with my partner, I was still hiding that I masturbated from him. Like, that's nuts. You know, like he's been inside of me. Like I can tell him when I'm jerking off, you know, but like that it was still so scary, you know, and to get to that point. And so I think just really being clear that like, if we have any hope of that happy, healthy, sexier, you know, future, that it has to come from us all, you know, doing the exhausting emotional work of being a place of listening for people, non-judgmentally, and knowing your biases, whatever they might be. And so that's the one message where I feel like if anyone takes any from the movie, I hope it's that.
Super important. Yeah. And I completely agree. And I think we're moving towards this as well when it comes to body image, right? Same kind of parallel ideas of like, there's been a lot of like, your body, love yourself and just look in the mirror and say that you're the best. And like, not everyone's at that point and not everyone wants to do that. So like body neutrality is also a really powerful way to be like, my body is one part of my identity and maybe I don't need to pay as much attention to it. And sometimes I feel good about it and sometimes I feel bad and sometimes I don't feel anything. And
right.
That's also healthy and normal.
I love that. Yeah.
Where can people find your film, A Sexplanation, and follow you and learn more?
Yeah, so if you go to sexplanation.com, starting June 6th, you can see all the places worldwide where you can buy or rent the film. Though in whatever country you are, except for maybe like North Korea and China, you will be able to find the film somehow. And so there's that. And then on social media, my personal ones are Alexander X Liu across all platforms. And then the movie ones are at A Sexplanation, all one word. And all the information there you want to know about how to get in contact with us, how to show this film in schools, all that stuff, that'll all be there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here, Alex. It's been so nice to meet you.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for just a thoughtful question. The time flew by. This has been a pleasure.
What's better than your partner's penis? 2 of your partner's penises, of course. Say hello to the amazing, the wonderful, the super fun Clonea Willy. Made in Portland, Oregon, Clonea Willy is exactly what you think it is. A DIY molding kit that allows anyone to make an exact replica of any penis or vulva into a high-quality, 100% body-safe sex toy. Because all parts are art. Use promo code SEXED with DB20 for 20% off at cloneawilly.com. We talk a lot about sex ed, but when we're shopping for products to support our sexual wellness, exploration, and expression, we head to the experts at Lion's Den. For 50 plus years, Lion's Den has been a leader in adult products. Whether you want to explore a new kink or add a little romance to your evening, Lion's Den has something for all. Each location is brightly lit and staffed with the very best experts in pleasure, passion, and romance, so you can feel comfortable and confident in your purchases. Lion's Den's offering our listeners 15% off your purchase in-store and online using code SEXED with DB. Did you know that American regulators consider sex toys as for novelty use only? This means that the materials are unregulated, yet we put them in the most absorbent places in our bodies. 25 years ago, Fun Factory was born with one mission: to provide body-safe, German-made toys for a level of safety you can't get anyplace else. I personally love that these toys are not only safe, but also ethically made and award-winning. It's the kind of luxury our bits deserve. Use discount code SEXED with DB for 15% off Fun Factory toys. What does self-love mean to you? To me, self-love is recognizing my needs and desires and making time to experience pleasure. That's what Satisfiers is all about. Satisfiers is committed to helping everyone unlock their full sexual potential, eliminating shame and demonstrating all the health benefits associated with sexual pleasure. The Satisfier Connect app pairs with their amazing toys so you can discover your personal pleasure preferences in real time. Use code SEXEDWithDB for 30% off at us.satisfier.com. Our creator, host, EP, and sound engineer is me, Danielle Bezalel, aka DB. Our co-producer and communications lead is Cathren Cohen. Our music theme is by Hook Sounds, and our ad music is by my stepdad, Bill Gann. Thank you so much to our featured guests, partners, and our listeners. Want to advertise with us? Email us at sexedwithdb@gmail.com. For more sex ed content, follow us on IG at sexedwithdbpodcast and on TikTok at sexedwithdb. See you next time.